Hey everyone, it's Peter Kerr from Rock Daydream Nation, and today we've got another Rush deep dive episode where we go into the album Grace Under Pressure from 1984. And I've got my esteemed colleagues back on the show. I've got Tim Durling from Tim's Vinyl Confessions, and I've got Todd Evans from the Contrarians, etc. Welcome, gents. How's it
Hi,
going?
it's good to be here.
Glad to be here
Great.
tonight again. Good to see you guys.
Absolutely. So what we'll do is round robin, we'll talk about our first impressions of the album when it came out in 1984. And then we will choose four of our favorite songs, 4 or 5. And we'll probably cover all songs because there are 8 songs on this album. And we'll go round robin, 1 song each. So just a little bit of stats in respect to this album. This came out in 1984. It went top 5 in the UK. Silver status. US, it went to number 10. Tim, 10. Single platinum. And in Canada, it went to number 4. It was produced by Steve Lillywhite. Well, sorry, I'll correct, back the truck. It was going to be produced by Steve Lillywhite, but he dropped out to produce Simple Minds. So it ended up getting produced by Rush and Peter Henderson, who is well renowned for producing Supertramp, Breakfast in America, Paul McCartney, and a few other major artists. It was not produced by Terry Brown, which was major in the Rush world. So I'll start off with you, Tim. What was your first impressions of this album in 1984, or when you first heard it?
Well, I first really got into the band in 1987, and Grace Under Pressure is a special one for me because it wasn't my first Rush album, but it was the first Rush album that I heard from start to finish. And the reason I heard it from start to finish is because my local library used to let you take out cassettes. And this is not the cassette. This is actually a US Mercury cassette, but just give you a size and scale. And they had Grace Under Pressure there. It was the only Rush one they had. So at this point, I had just gotten myself my very first dual cassette recorder so I could make copies of albums. And I made a copy of it. So it was the first album where I heard more than just like singles and videos. Although, oddly enough, this one I'd heard half of it. Of the 8 songs on it, I'd heard 4 of them because there was Distant Early Warning, was a very popular video. Red Sector A, the live from the Grace Under Pressure live video got played. Enemy Within and Body Electric were all videos I'd seen, so therefore I knew the songs. And I know someone's going to say there was also a video for After Image, but that I did not see that for many, many years later. But I like the album. It stands out for a few reasons, not least of which is that it is the only one that they had Peter Henderson working on. He was not their first choice, as Pete already said. You know, Steve Lillywhite basically bailed on them at the last minute, which for a producer is pretty unprofessional. You don't agree to sign on to work with a band and then just, bail on them at the last minute. It was, I believe, the longest gap between Rush albums because they were just cranking them out. And so there was no Rush album in 1983. So it was quite a long time between the release of Signals and the release of Grace Under Pressure in April of 84. But, a lot of great songs on it, a lot of songs that would become concert staples, very, very influenced by the events of the day. And some of those events have come back around, Cold War, nuclear war, acid rain, the environment, and, a lot of Red songs on this album too. So, we'll get into some of those, but yeah, my first impression of it was the very first Rush album I heard from start to finish. So I'll always have a soft spot for that.
Nice. Thanks, Tim. Great start. Todd, what was your first impressions of this album?
Well, my first impression of Grace Under Pressure was it was the first Rush album that I heard while I was working at a record store. I started working at a record store in 1983. And so when it came out, I was working in the store and was able to get it out of the box and, open it up and put it on. And one of the things I remember about it was that during its first week of release, there's a sound at the beginning of the album. It's about 12 seconds in, where it's like a distorted, like almost a squashed explosion happening. And people returned the album. People returned the vinyl because they thought it was a defect.
Oh,
so we had to figure out how to tell people that it was actually like for real.
It's supposed to be like that.
Yeah, it was supposed to be like that.
That's
so I remember
incredible.
that. One of the things that I mean, this album had bass pedals, it had more keyboards, it had all the things I was really into back then. And I mean, when I heard it, I was like, come on, guys, I already liked Rush. I didn't need all this extra stuff. What are you doing to me? Now, at that point, I was like, oh, now I love Rush even more than I already did. So I was very enthusiastic about it, and I liked it a lot. And at the time, it's interesting. One of the things I like about the album is that I've always thought the theme of the album for me is expect the unexpected, because there's a lot of songs where you expect there'll be a guitar solo and then there's not. And then there are some songs where you think, okay, well, there's not going to be one here either. And then they give you one. So right where you think it's going to be. So I've always thought that was cool. I've always thought it was great that there's such a great mix of electronic drums and acoustic drums, to the point where you get so used to it while you're listening to the album that it doesn't really stand out anymore. It's just kind of seamless. And that I've always thought was cool, because at the time it came out, it seemed like the consensus was that everybody liked it and nobody went, oh, what's with these electronic drums? It was done so well that it didn't really seem to have any backlash, at least in my little world. It's interesting about the producers, though, because for Steve Lillywhite, right? Correct? Is that correct? For him to pull out of it, I mean, at that point, Rush was not exactly chopped liver. I mean, that was, I would think that you'd be somewhat honored to be producing the next Rush album. And if he had done Rush instead of Simple Minds, I mean, his involvement with Simple Minds is kind of what pushed them to another level. So that would really have changed the course of music history if that had happened. So I think that's very interesting.
Yeah, well, Simple Minds were a band on the up, because they had 81, 82, 83, New Gold Dream, and that was getting a lot of heat in the UK. And he probably heard something sonically that he thought that he could push to the next level. And the subsequent albums were Sparkle in the Rain. And I mean,
I guess he wasn't wrong, but I would think that of course, I'd pick Rush, and I like both bands. But
yeah,
he produced the early U2 albums too, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
Yes, he did. They were gutted. I've read testimonies that they were really, really disappointed. And Rush are very polite gents. And I've seen some of the commentary in the day, and they were very upset.
Well, they had to scramble
back. Yeah.
Yeah, they had to scramble.
I mean, when I got the album, go ahead, Tim. I'm sorry.
Not every, like Geddy said, or maybe it was Alex said, the top producers, they're booked for months and years in advance. It's not like you can just call somebody out of the blue. And that's why they ended up settling for Peter Henderson. They said that he was a really good engineer, but as a producer, someone who could help make decisions, help them, pick takes of songs, he wasn't very good. That's one of the reasons why it took them so long. And it's one of the reasons why they took a co-producing credit on it, because they, in a lot of ways, they did do it themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I heard that Trevor Horn was also in the mix as well. They invited him to one of their concerts.
They invited him and Chris Squire, and they considered both of them.
Yeah.
Like one or the other.
That would have been interesting too.
Yeah.
Could you mention Trevor Horn with the wall of synth sounds? The strings. Because
I think that's why they went with Peter Collins for the next couple of albums. They wanted someone in England that was tied into that scene.
Yeah. So what was Trevor Horn doing in 1984? Frankie Goes to Hollywood. Imagine that sound. Two Tribes.
Yeah.
Would have been very interesting.
Yeah, and I think at the time, Trevor Horn probably thought of Frankie Goes to Hollywood as like his full-time job. I mean, that was when he was really immersed in it. So he probably wouldn't have been able to do it.
That Two Tribes has got 100 remixes. He was a very busy guy.
He was busy, yeah.
There's so many versions of that song out. But anyway, hey, my first impressions this was my first Rush album, guys. I picked the cassette up from my local record store. And in Australia, the sounds of the radio were the Police, U2, New Wave, and synth pop. And when I played it, it just fell right into that sort of wheelhouse. And I loved it. And the first song that really caught my ear was The Body Electric. Had that real nice groove. I'll talk more about it, but just the sound of it was just very contemporary for 1984. And I loved it. And that set me off on the Rush journey. I just wish I had that damn cassette. And like most of my cassettes, they're gone. But yeah, I just wish I kept it. Anyway. All right, guys, that's great. So why don't we go round robin and just one song at a time, and we'll talk about it. So, Tim, what's your first pick with one of your favorite songs off this album?
I'm going to pick this one first because it kind of snuck up on me. It was a song that I always liked, but it really, really hit home when I saw it live. The one time that I did see Rush live in concert, which was the R30 tour, in the set list, they played Between the Wheels, which is the last song in the album. And it's a heavy, dark, menacing song. The synths are dark. It's in drop D. It's a really, really sort of, there's a grinding to it. And there's a grinding in the lyrics too about, living in between times. And, you know how that rabbit feels under your spinning wheels. And I just remember that Geddy sang it so well. I love, I think it's some of his most passionate vocals in the chorus, but I especially love his vocal in the final chorus when he goes up and down to "Brother, Can You Spare Another War?" Like when that part at the end, and and then it's back to "Lost Generation," and it's just dun dun dun, like it's almost oppressive, and it really sums the album up. And I love Alex's solo in it. His soul, some of his most unique soloing can be found on this album too. So yeah, that's my first pick, is Between the Wheels.
Oh, that's a great first pick, Tim. Great, good stuff. Todd.
No, for me, I'm going to go with After Image first. After Image, first thing on my notes here, it says bass pedals. Man, those bass pedals just hit you, and it almost parts your hair. It's so powerful and so well recorded. The track is dedicated to a man named Robbie Whelan, who was a friend of the band, who was an assistant engineer who was killed in an auto accident. And he seems to be saying and what he said, what it seems like what Geddy is saying here and what Neil wrote is, something bad just happened. I don't understand what it is, and I don't think I ever will. And I think that's very relatable. That kind of goes along with the solo too. Alex's solo, it's kind of frenetic, and it switches back and forth between lead and rhythm, like chords, and it kind of goes back and forth. And it's almost as if Alex is like, I don't even know what to play here, and it's like Geddy is singing, I don't know how to feel here. And I don't mean that as an insult to Alex. I think that's really super cool. And it goes right along with that whole expect the unexpected thing. I don't think there's anything in that track that I expected when I heard it for the first time. But the lyric is very touching, and the part where he says, I feel the way you would. I mean, that's kind of the ultimate tribute when you lose somebody and you start thinking as you go through your life, what would Robbie have thought of this? I think I feel the way he would, if you know somebody that well. And I just think it's beautiful. It's very touching, and it's a very powerful song. But the notion of it sounds like they're saying, we don't have any answers here. We don't know how to feel about this terrible thing that just happened, and we may never. And that's pretty dark, but it doesn't really make you feel, bad. It doesn't put you in a dark place when you listen to it. It just sounds like a tribute. Yeah,
uplifting. Yeah, I think that's a top song, and they just pull these personal songs out of the bag and just make it just so moving for the listener. And that's definitely one of those ones. That's a really good choice. Well, my pick is going to be Distant Early Warning. So that's that's the entry point to the album. I think Alex's guitar work is melodic and driven. His guitar work on this album is fantastic. It's not necessarily flashy, but it sits within the confines of the song. And there's even his chordal progressions, it drives the song along. There's a lot of call and response with his guitar work, and it just makes just some of the songs sound so atmospheric. And I think particularly on this song, his guitar playing is especially stellar. There's a lot of build and release tension. I love the bass playing and the lyrics. So we're in 1984 and you've got Reagan, you've got Gorbachev, you've got nuclear missiles pointed at each other, and the world was in, it was Cold War, and there was a lot of nervousness. 2022, not much has changed, has it really? And this is, we talk about this every episode when we do a Rush album, but there's so many lyrics that were written like 20, 30 years ago that are so contemporary and timeless. This is not a dated band. And the themes of this song and throughout this album are very much contemporary. I like the counterpoint where I feel that the song, and a lot of these songs have different interpretations, but I find this song is a father fearing for his child and what the future will bring. And I love that lyric where it goes, "The world weighs on my shoulders, but what am I to do? You sometimes drive me crazy, but I worry about you." I just think it's just so heartfelt. And it just makes me think about my daughter and, what's the world going to be for her in 10, 20 years when you're reading all these clickbait articles about what's happening in Russia and the world. It's just, it's frightening. But I just love this lyric. It's thoughtful, it's deep, and I think it's a really stellar track. All right, over to you, Tim. What do you got?
I'm going to swing back to After Image. That was my next choice. And a word about Robbie Whelan. Yes, he was an assistant engineer at the studio, which Rush recorded from Permanent Waves through to Grace Under Pressure. Then they came back, I believe, for Presto. And sadly, it's abandoned. It's fell into disuse. There's footage of Neil Peart touring the remains. You could see the old piano in there, but it was quite a place, and it was quite a place where bands would just go and stay. And and there was there was chefs, and they would just go there and stay and do nothing but work on the music. And Robbie Whelan is an engineer they got to know very well, and he's also remembered on an album by another Canadian band, April Wine, on their album Animal Grace, which came out in early '84, like this one did. And it said dedicated to the memory of Robbie Whelan. It too was recorded in the studio. But Neil Peart has gone on record as in one of his books. I can't remember what one it is, whether it's Roadshow or Traveling Music. I'm not sure which one, but basically that, when this guy was killed, I think he was killed in an auto accident on his way to the studio. And he said that unlike, an elderly grandmother or grandfather dying where you're sad, but you're kind of expecting it, this was the first time that any of them had lost a friend their own age, and just suddenly he was gone. And, it was the shock of it. And I love how he talks about, shouts of joy skiing fast through the woods. And then I see the footprints. I remember. And after image is a photographic term for, it's a photographic term. I can't remember what it is, but it's basically something that's left behind. And yeah, I feel the way you would. That is so powerful in so few words. And I don't think there's any greater compliment you can give someone to say that they were a compassionate, caring person. It's like, well, how do you feel? So, well, I feel the way they would. They would think this stinks. Well, I think it stinks too. This just can't be understood. And that opening line, sadly, has been used so many times for Neil. Like, suddenly you were gone from all the lives you left your mark upon. That's written inside the live album Distant Stages, dedicated to Neil's wife and his daughter. And then when Neil died, it was used all over again. I mean, it's a very powerful song too, musically. And if you, even if you see the video is kind of bizarre. It was shot in England. It has a very different look to it than their other videos. Even like they're lip syncing basically for the cameras or whatever, just playing along to the track. There's a side plot where there's like a little boy and it's implied that he's lost his mother and he doesn't understand it, but it's secondary to me. The expressions on the faces of the band members when they're doing this song, especially the very end when it does that dun dun dun, and Neil just kind of sits and he's just got this look on his face, like it's very powerful. But the song in and of itself, like, it was years before I saw the video, and I've always enjoyed the song. But Todd's right; it doesn't leave you feeling down. Rather, I think it makes you feel better because you're like, okay, well, there's other people that maybe understand what someone might be going through, and it's relatable. And that's almost as good as making someone feel better if you can at least relate. So, yeah, that's my next choice is After Image.
Yeah, it's like everybody has those moments where they feel like the only thing they can say is, "This sucks. I hate it."
Yeah.
Everybody.
Yeah, there's nothing good. There's
right.
no comfort to be taken. It's just, it's no good. It's no good.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not the first time Rush have used photography as a metaphor. There's a few different songs through their catalog where they've used a song lyrics around photography and images. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. Available.
And definitely not the last either.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Well, my next pick, it's probably my favorite track on the album, is The Body Electric. I love that bass. I love the drum line. It's kind of got a really odd drum line, and it's kind of like a march-like shuffle, and the counterpart with the bass. And then it goes into this really kind of funky groove. I love it. The lyrics are quite interesting. It's based on a Twilight episode where a family orders a robot grandmother after the death of their young mother. True that. And in this, the lyrics of this particular song, the robot is trying to break free of their social structure. So I'm thinking it may be like that Isaac Asimov book, I, Robot, if anyone has read that. I like the lyrics of 100 SOS. It's earworm. It just gets in my head.
Yeah.
It's got really edge-like U2 guitar, but Alex makes it his own. So when he gets into that guitar lead break, you go, oh, that sounds very much like The Edge, but then he, puts his own personality on it. Alex never overplays, does he? He just does it just right within the confines of the song, because there are some guitarists out there, they overplay and they try to be the star and they don't let the song be served appropriately. Alex never allows that to happen, especially on this song. Like, I just love his counter melodies. Again, I would love to hear Alex's just solo guitar lines throughout this whole album. It'd be really interesting to hear this through. Maybe there might be a box set coming out one day and you just hear the isolated guitar parts for Alex, because I think they're fascinating. Anyway, I think it's my favorite song on the album. I love it. The Body Electric.
So I'm going to pick Red Sector A for my next one. Very interesting song. No bass guitar, which is, I love bass guitar, but that's just fine with me. I like when bands change up the instrumentation. And according to the band, it's supposed to provide a first-person account of somebody living in some kind of prison camp situation. It doesn't specify it, but it's inspired by Getty's research on the Holocaust, and since his mother was in a camp, and he had asked her one time what her thoughts were about being liberated, and she said that she didn't think that they would be liberated, because if society would let this happen this far, then society must be just gone. And I've always thought that was just really interesting. And Neil says similar things. Neil has said that in his research, talking to people who went through that they believed that they were the last people on Earth, because everyone else just must be gone for this to be allowed to happen. And so I just think that that's really powerful. I think the song is super cool. I like the instrumentation of it, and it just really makes an impression on me. Very powerful song.
Another great lyric.
Yeah, for sure.
The quality of lyrics on this album, and I think we've said this in every album that we've covered in this show, have just been top notch. It's a really, really strong lyric. All right, Tim.
I'm going to go off the beaten path a little bit. This is tough, but I'm going to go with Kid Gloves. This is a slow grower. I think it's a really cool lyric, and it's I interpret it as an anti-bullying song. That's what I get out of it, because I've talked about this before. When my school experience, I was like that kid in the Subdivisions video, the loner, the one that got, kind of, you get the feeling he was picked on for really not fitting into one group or another. Yeah. I wasn't a jock, and I wasn't, I made I didn't play sports. It was so, and when you're alone a lot, you're a target, but the lyrics to it are so good. Anger got bare knuckles, anger play the fool. And the music is just, especially that chorus, when it's just like I'm getting, the floor tom, do, 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 do. Like, even though it's not a heavy song, it's so powerful. And I love the fact that the verses that skip around with a time signature so much. I'm not even sure what it's in. It's anything but 4/4. Then you learn the lesson that it's tough to be so cool, or it's cool to be so tough. Like, Neil does all these turnarounds with his lyrics where he never repeats himself exactly. He might say something very similar, but it's different than the first time around, or it's reversed, and it's never by chance. It's always on purpose. It's got a really interesting solo it's almost just Alex soloing with chords, rather than playing a bunch of licks. Wow, 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 like he's just messing around. And it's funny, it's very Edge influence, because that's a lot of what he did. Well, like he would do that rather than playing, your typical pentatonic scales or whatever, but it really works. And, people say what they will about the whole production situation. I think this album sounds great. I love the drum sound on it. It does have lots of synths on it, which I'm okay with, but it's pound for pound, it's a heavier, more guitar oriented album than with Signals. And I love Signals too. It kind of stands alone because it's right there in between, their first big synthy album and then their big forays into technology. This has a little bit of everything. Like, it definitely is, a rocking album. There's no ballads on here. There's nothing mellow on here at all. And I just like this song. I like the jaunty is not the right word for it, but it's really got a pulse, and it really just picks up and keeps going. Yeah, this is one that I grew to love more and more and more over the years. And maybe it's because, this and Between the Wheels, maybe it's because I didn't hear them as much as some of the other songs on here, but yeah, Kid Gloves.
Yeah, that's a great choice. I agree with what you said about sonically. Just playing it on my stereo system, there's so much oomph in the bottom end. And I don't know if it's the bass pedals or the synth or whatnot, but it really comes out. And to me, it sounds a very contemporary album. It doesn't date. Yeah, there's synth drumming, but it works. And to me, in 2022, this sounds very fresh and contemporary and very now.
Yeah. Yeah. Doesn't sound dated.
No. And there are a lot of albums of that era that have similar sonic synth drums and do sound dated.
Yeah.
So I don't know what they were doing on the production side, and some interesting comments that you did at the start, Tim, but whatever they did, it worked.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of these albums that come out, if they're experimenting with too much technology, the albums kind of become time capsules.
Yes.
They're glued to sometimes not only the year, but it's like the month of the year. The Syndromes are really popular in April,
Right. And a lot of times albums like that, I still love those albums anyway.
Oh, me too.
I can admit that they sound dated, but in this case,
but this is timeless sounding.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially the synth hand claps. Hate that.
Oh, yes. Some really bad synth drum sounds that
and the orchestra hit. The sound from
yeah.
And I've got a version of this album. I don't know. This is the actual Grace Under Pressure tour album that came out about 5-6 years ago. These songs come out really well live.
Yeah.
Really, really well. And it's really interesting to see on this tour. And I'll ask you, Todd, if you were on this, saw this tour or not. We'll save that for later. But
Okay.
even their old material sounds great.
Yeah, definitely.
So, yep. Well, the song I'm going to choose is Red Sector A. So, again, it's about a nameless protagonist in a prison camp. Evokes a concentration camp of the Holocaust. Really deep lyrics. It's about survival, and it's about the title of this album, Grace Under Pressure. You know, they're in this concentration camp. They're incarcerated. What is outside? It's got the most haunting melodies. It's moody. It's stark. A lot of it, a commentary that I've seen. Remember that movie, The Day After?
Yeah.
That came out?
Right around this time.
Yeah. I find this song is very evocative of that movie, very sort of dire. It was just the world was going to end. It was very much, there was a lot of fear in 1984. What was going to happen to the world? And I think this song really picks up the mood of that particular time.
I was 9-10 years old. I was scared to death listening to the news.
100%.
And my parents had no way of assuring me because they didn't know it was going to happen either.
Yeah. I think from memory, The Day After was the biggest rating American TV show or movie. It was a telly movie. It got released in the cinemas over here, but I think it was the biggest rating TV movie in history in America until maybe MASH topped it with the farewell, whatever. I don't know. I might have my dates wrong, but definitely rated its socks off. Sonically, Alex's chords just drive it along. There's no bass guitar. It's all synthesizer and vocals. It's one of the rare ones where Geddy doesn't actually play the bass, and it just drives it along. I love it. I think it's a really compelling, moody song. Yeah, it's just another strong track. There's no real dud tracks on this album, is there? I think it's so strong.
It's like somebody has to tell you there's no bass guitar in Red Sector A, because it's not like you feel like anything's missing.
No, the bottom end is right. Like the bottom end is there. You're not missing. Yeah. It's not thin sounding.
It comes out on my stereo. Oh, yeah. It's just powerful. And I love, 8 tracks, guys. No fat.
Yeah.
Not the CD age.
I've always, nobody's asked me this, but I'm going to say it anyway. I've always thought that the 8-track format was best for Rush, and I always kind of wish they'd have hung with it, because it was kind of 8-track, yeah. But I mean, 4 tracks on side A and 4 tracks on side B is what I was talking about.
I have to show this off because I paid a lot of money for this.
I'm so jealous of that.
Rare. This is so. This is a Canadian.
I am so jealous of that.
So. Yeah.
Guys, I think the CD age is great, where you got to hear that pristine sound quality, but a lot of bands put a lot of fatty songs, a lot of filler. Yeah. And I love the vinyl age, where let's just put the 8 to 10 best songs. There's no dud song on this album. 8 songs, 4/4. That's what you need. Filler. And I don't like this CD age where a lot of these bands 15, 16 bonus tracks, and it's just too flabby. There's no flab on this album.
To me, CDs were great for compilations, live albums. Like, to me, they're great for that. But but Rush never really succumbed to filling up a CD for the sake of it.
Right. Yeah. The closest they got was probably Vapor Trails, and even then it worked for them.
Yeah. And a CD, correct me, gents, it's about 55 minutes, is it? And a record is 78,
about 78 minutes.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, it started at 74, and then they figured out a way to cram 4 or 5 extra more minutes.
That's why when the original CDs to All the World's a Stage and Exit Stage Left first came out, they had to cut a song from each of them off when they put them out on CD, or they would have had to make them 2 CD sets. But what I love about Rush is that they're thinking all the time. They took those 2 songs and they put them on Chronicles when that compilation came out in 1990. It's
right.
Like, these guys they just know stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. All right, Todd, what do you got?
I'm going to go with The Enemy Within. And This song is driven by what I think is a magnificent bass arrangement. Just absolutely fantastic. Pow pow pounding in your temples.
I love it.
I love that. I love that so much. It's got a gentle keyboard melody after the chorus that almost acts as like a sub chorus. And it's like, it kind of slows down and it's almost like there's two choruses, like one right after the other, but there's no lyrics in the second one. I like that it has and that keyboard part that sort of acts like a second chorus is completely different from the rest of the song. And then it goes back. I love that it's got a bridge in it that it's not, I guess it's a bridge. It's like a part that's different. It's not the verse, it's not the chorus, it's just a different part, but it doesn't lead into a guitar solo. Again, something you wouldn't expect. There's just a part where he sings something different, and it's got a different melody, and it's got a lot of drum fills in it, but it's just exists on its own. It doesn't lead into a solo. And the song is more positive than some of the other songs. I mean, I'm not giving in, let's see, to security and pressure. I'm not missing out. I'm not giving up. So it's a little more positive than some of the others. So yeah, The Enemy Within has always been a favorite.
Yeah. No, I agree with everything you said, man. That's great. Tim?
This is a tough one, but I gotta, I'm pretty clear in what my choice is. I just want to show this off because I think it's cool. I got out everything that I had that was Grace Under Pressure oriented. This is a UK single from the Body Electric.
Wow.
And I love the label on
nice shot.
And on the label itself, it's got the C clamp. Yes. And this is the other side of it. It's got the B side is the Analog Kid from Signals. I thought that was pretty cool.
On the Vertigo.
Show the front of that again. Show the front of that again.
Yeah.
I wanted to see
that photo is.
Does it have that same? No, the photo on the cover. Does it have?
Oh, sorry.
I used to have a 10-inch British single that. Yeah, the picture where
I was going to say it's probably the same. Yeah, if it was a British one, they probably followed suit for all the men. Even the
was a. White cover.
It even folds over differently than most singles. Mm-hmm.
It's a really nice photo, Tim.
I just happened to come across it in a used store here. I didn't order as an import or anything, but it's pretty cool.
And it's on the Vertigo label, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's really hard for me to pick between Distant Early Warning and Red Sector A. Red Sector A is such a powerful song. Especially you can hear the passion in Geddy's voice because his parents were they met in concentration camps, and the stories about how his grandmother would make them line up on different sides because when they were going, the Nazis would choose who was going to the gas chamber that day. They'd alternate. So the grandmother's like, we're either going to all live or we'll all die. Just these choices that these people had to make to try to keep some sort of normalcy together, sickness to insanity, prayer to profanity. Anyway, that's not the song I'm going with, but it's a darn close contender. I have to go with Distant Early Warning because it's such a, when I started getting into Rush, our Canada's version of MTV is Much Music, and they played a lot of Rush. I mean, they played a lot of Canadian artists, obviously, that we have to here in Canada, but they were really supportive of Canadian artists, both up and coming and established. As a matter of fact, when Much Music first went on the air in August of 1984, the very first video they played was The Enemy Within. So there's a little bit of trivia for you. I suppose it would have probably been new at the time, but Distant Early Warning is probably the video I saw the most. It was very, very popular with the kid riding around on the rocket. I've heard conflicting stories. I've read that's Geddy's son, Julian.
Yes.
In the video.
I've heard that too, but
I've heard Geddy himself say, no, it's not.
Yes.
So I don't know. I don't know. But anyway, it's a really interesting song. When I was a kid, I just thought the music was cool. I didn't really, I knew it was about war because obviously you've got the rockets, the band's playing on what appears to be like a pentagon or like a United Nations, everybody seated around. There's nobody seated around, but they're playing on this very strange looking stage. But Distant Early Warning is a term. There's like a warning system if like missiles are spotted or something like that. And then you've got, at that time, you had the not the Cuban Missile Crisis, but you had the plane that was shot down over Russian airspace. Gary Moore has a song about a murder in the skies right around the same time. And there was just a lot of tension in the world. And this song talks about that, but it also talks about the closer things about family. And like Peter was saying, you sometimes drive me crazy, but I worry about you. Like, your parent, as a parent, your kids will drive you nuts, but you love them no matter what. And you're worried about them. No matter what the day-to-day aggravations might be, and I love the line, it's so hard to stay together. And you hear that one line, you think, yeah, it's hard to stay together, passing through revolving doors. And then it gets to the mundane things of everyday life. We need someone to talk to and someone to sweep the floors. That's got nothing to do with nuclear war, but at the same time, there's the everyday concerns and then there's the larger concerns. And Neil's got them all coupled within those lyrics. And musically, it's perfect. I've heard the song so many times, I never get tired of it. What makes that sound at the beginning of that song I've read is a steam bubbler. Whatever a steam bubbler is, get yourself one, and you'll think you're hearing the beginning of Just an Early Warning. It's probably quite processed in the studio. I don't know. Yeah. Now you can probably get a plug-in and recreate it perfectly. But that's the beginning of the sound that you hear. Alex is, a lot of chordal solos on this album. But I love like I'm dance, like it's just perfect. Everything's just perfect.
That sound when he plays that too is so wicked sounding. It's
you just get into it, right? And the look of the band was very distinctive during this time too. By now, Geddy's playing the little Steinberger bass, the little, I call it a toaster with a fretboard. He's playing that. And Neil's got his ponytail, which I always thought was funny because it was one of those things you'd see it, then you would
very 1984, very 1984,
yeah. And you'd be like, does he have a ponytail? And you couldn't really tell for sure unless you could like freeze it or something like that. But it's such an important song for them. It was never a big charting song for them. I remember it's only been within the last few years. I was driving. One of my favorite places to, look for music is about 3 hours away. It's a city called Moncton. And I was listening to the local rock station there as I was driving through. You're flipping through the radio if I'm not listening to a CD. I'm old school like that. And they played Distant Early Warning, which, whatever, I'm grooving along right on. And I kept thinking as I'm listening to it, I was like, this seems strange to me. And I couldn't put my finger on why it seemed strange to me. But eventually it hit me that that's the first time I ever heard a song from Grace Under Pressure on the radio, because from like Moving Pictures, Permanent Waves, they had radio staples off of those albums. And basically everything after that, there was at least one single that got some play. It's the first time, like probably within the last 5 years, first time I'd ever heard a song from Grace Under Pressure on the radio. And I was like, wow, that's kind of weird, even though it's such a well-known song. So yeah, that's my fourth pick.
No, good stuff. I did a show with Armando Vendetti on the Queen the Game, and we were talking and reminiscing. Do you remember when radio used to play deep album tracks? Or that weren't in the charts,
especially late at night. They'd play whatever they wanted, or if you if you're heading up to the top of the hour and you need a certain amount of time, if you find a song that works, you'll put it on no matter what it is.
Absolutely. And we were just reminiscing. He had a similar experience. He just heard this deep album track of Queen in his car, and he had to said, "Stop the car! I've got to hear this." And I would have had that similar sort of experience. After all this time,
sometimes you still do get surprised. And I'll share a short little story with you guys. And it's not the album we're talking about, but I guess it would have been about 1995. My good friend Matt, who helped design my book, did a great job on it. He used to live in Ontario. He's from New Brunswick, like I am, but he used to live in Ontario. And it was years before he got into Rush. I was always the Rush fan. Eventually, he got on board. And I don't know if it was just years of hanging around with me, just finally got through, or he succumbed. I don't know what it was, but anyway, I remember he came to visit me once, and he kept singing "Fly By Night," but he'd sing it like in a mocking way. And I said, first thing, how do you even know that song? how do you even know Fly By Night? And he said, there's a rock station in Brockville that plays it all the bloody time. And I'm like, Fly By Night? I had no idea that was a radio staple. I had no idea that was a classic rock radio staple. It just struck me funny. I was like, of all the songs you're going to like, how do you even know how that goes? Never mind, like, heard it a million times. So it's just one of those funny things. And it used to be dependent on where you live. Now it really doesn't matter. It's pretty much the same format wherever you are. But yeah, Grace Under Pressure is not an album like Permanent Waves. You'll hear Spirit of Radio and Free Will quite a bit. I've even heard Entre Nous on the radio. Certainly Moving Pictures and Signals, Subdivisions, New World Man. Grace Under Pressure, one time I heard Distant Early Warning. That's it.
Yeah, wow. Oh, well, the good old days.
Yep.
The good old days. The song I'm going to give a little bit of love to, I think is the most prog song on the album, is Red Lenses. I love it. I like the musicology. It's got all these big time changes, time signature changes, key changes. You've got that funky slap bass, really interesting drum pattern from Neil. And lyrically, it's a deep lyric, but it plays around the word of red. Red in respect of Mars, red as in Russia, red's under the bed.
Red isn't something you read.
Absolutely. I mean, Sammy Hagar would love this song.
That's right. Yeah. It's got no substitute for red.
Yeah. I just think it just plays on the metaphor of red. So I'm not going to get in too deep with the lyrics other than that. But I just think musically it's interesting. And I like the big widescreen Rush sound, the big palette, and they just explore it. It just you think the song's going in one direction, and then it does a left turn and goes in another direction. And it's just the full widescreen Rush. And that's what I love. And I'd give it a bit of love. Red Lenses.
I love the part. It cracks me up every time. Says the National Midnight Star. It's true.
Yeah.
You don't expect, it's got humor in it, the Soviets are the blues, the Reds. And then it goes into that little you're not expecting it.
No.
Yeah, it's one of the few Rush songs. Might be like among, like, count on one hand the number of Rush songs that start right off with vocals.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it makes such an impression too, because he says it, he enunciates it so clearly. He says, I see red.
I see red. And yeah. You got Red Sector A, Red Lenses, Distant Early Warnings, Red Alert. It's a very, and yet there might be a little bit of red on here. It's almost pink, but it would have been more suitable for like Hold Your Fire, which is all red.
Yeah.
But interesting song. Interesting lyrics.
I think it's the most proggy on the album. Anyway, all right, Todd.
That covers we've covered every single song on here.
Yeah, I was going to mention Red Lenses when I mentioned my fourth, just because nobody had mentioned it yet. But great that you picked it. I also want to say a couple quick things about Distant Early Warning before I go on to the song that I picked as my fourth. But Distant Early Warning is a perfect example of how heavy doesn't have to mean distorted guitar, because it feels like the keyboard parts in that are really kind of heavy. I like that. And I want to say this real quick. I like the way that there's repeated words in it, and he does it more than one time. He says, red alert, incomplete. And then he said, and he changes it up and says, obsolete, absolute. I absolutely love that. And it's one of my favorite solos. Another one of those solos that's lead and rhythm, and it goes back and forth, and it ends almost with like a rhythm guitar arrangement. And it's just so great. But the song I picked, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. I was just going to say, and such a big sound for a three-piece. It's huge sound.
I remember going back to my record store days. I'll say this real quick. I do remember somebody coming in the day that album came out and we were playing it. And I remember somebody saying to us, man, they make a lot of noise for just three guys.
Yeah.
And that was like on the day that album came out. But the song I picked was Between the Wheels. And I love the guitar solo right from the start. And the keyboard intro of it is loud and is like mixed right in the front. And then it kind of chugs along in kind of like a high-tech reggae kind of a groove. But during the chorus, the keyboards are super thick and super lush, and the bass pedals are loud. I mean, it's a really gutsy mix. And but I mostly love it because of the guitar solo. And this is one of the albums that gives you an Alex guitar solo right where you expect it to be. And I think it probably is my favorite Alex guitar solo. Melodically, I just think that it's absolutely perfect. The run up towards the end of it is just melodically so well composed. And it's always been my favorite Alex solo. So yeah, Between the Wheels. Absolutely.
Another thing about those keyboards at the beginning, it's one of those ones, the first time you hear the song, the one doesn't come in where you think it will.
Right. That's a trick that I love. I love it.
Yeah. But it's like 1 and 2 and 3 and you're right. I never thought about it.
It's
like
off beat. It's off the beat.
Dense reggae, because it's like but you'd never call it reggae because it's so heavy.
That thing about tricking you where one is one of my favorite tricks. Genesis does that sometimes. Keep It Dark comes to mind, and I absolutely love that. I like to be tricked.
Believe it or not, AC/DC does that a lot.
Oh yeah, they do. You're right.
If you start off with just a riff and then the drums come in, you're like, "Whoa, I wasn't expecting."
That's not where I thought I was. Yeah.
It would be hard to do
trick.
on stage. You'd have to look at each other, like 1, 2, like you'd really have to know what you're doing. Otherwise, you could have one of those train wrecks.
But these guys have got ESP, haven't they, by this time? I think they know, even in that studio setting when they're jamming, they know they've got that synchronicity. Yeah. They've got that synchronicity. They know when to come in. But I love the lyrics on this song.
Yeah. Don't
be a passenger. Engage. Don't hide under the covers, as Tim really articulated at the start of the show. Intervene. I really love the lyrics of this song, and it's a perfect album closer. And I think the sequencing of this album is superb, don't you guys?
I think they always seem to know just how to start the side, end the side, start side 2. They would always put a lot of work into that. But yeah, and when you talk about how they change from album to album, when you line up the album closer to the song that begins the next album, in terms of mood and setting and overall sonics, Between the Wheels followed by The Big Money, it's so different. The Big Money is so bright and like, hey, whereas Between the Wheels is like, yeah, I'm really thinking about what I just heard.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you guys have any other songs that you want to do a bit of a shout out that you may not have covered or called out thus far?
I picked 6. So I had 2 honorable mentions, and so I think I've hit all the ones. Yeah. I'm glad somebody picked The Body Electric. I feel bad. I feel bad.
My favorite song.
I don't want to leave any of these songs out. Because
all good.
None of them are worthy of being left out.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I might go to you, Todd. Did you see this tour, Grace Under Pressure?
I did.
Any recollections that you'd like to share with us?
Once you get into the 80s with Rush, I saw a whole bunch of them in a row. And so it's difficult for me to really pick out which one was which, because one of the things that they did was, starting with Distant Early Warning, they started playing videos, in the screen behind them, and it was part of the show. And so when they played Distant Early Warning in subsequent tours, they played the video. And so, and they did that with Marathon too. There was a video for Marathon with the animated chorus singing. And then when they played that on, Hold Your Fire, they still played the video for it. And so that was always really made an impression on me, because I loved the Distant Early Warning video. And I used to always think, I hope they play it, and I hope they play the video. And they always did. And so that was really fun. But my first Rush show was Permanent Waves. And I missed Moving Pictures because I was in high school band, and I'm sure there was a game or something like that. And so I missed that, and I saw Signals. And so I don't really have a lot of really specific recollections to the tour for Grace Under Pressure. I wish I did. I think it's just the years have started blurring some things together.
Yeah.
But I do remember it was spectacular. And I do remember that the bass pedals were well represented, and Geddy, multitasking Geddy was handling it all. So,
Cool.
Yeah, by then he really would have been getting into that orchestration role, which kind of reached its peak at Hold Your Fire, where he just had synthesizers anywhere, and sometimes he'd play that little bass.
Absolutely.
And even Alex had a keyboard at one point.
Yeah.
Tim, any sort of comments that you want to make regarding this album in a live setting? You may have seen a video or may have seen it on stage.
You had held up the soundtrack to the Grace Under Pressure live home video, which is something that it had evaded me for many, many years because I never ever saw it anywhere. I only have it on the Replay ×3 DVD set, which is when they put out the Exit Stage Left, Grace Under Pressure live, and Show of Hands for the first time on DVD. And as a bonus, it's got the audio of the Grace Under Pressure live, because that was never released by itself. Eventually it was. So I know Exit Stage Left like the back of my hand, and I know A Show of Hands quite well too. That Grace Under Pressure live, I still listen to that, and it's like I'm hearing of those versions for the first time, like them opening with Spirit of Radio. I mean, it's always good. And I love them doing the Fear trilogy, with Enemy Within and The Weapon, with the Count Floyd intro, and then Witch Hunt.
Thank you, Tim. I forgot about that. Yeah, I do remember that.
This is a scary one. Starting with Signals, and Grace Under Pressure would have been the second one, but starting with Signals, that's when they really overhauled their set lists and played very, very few 70s songs. Like on the Signals tour, I think they played everything live except for Losing It. They didn't do Losing It until the very last tour, or at least the last couple of tours. And I think that they did a lot of Grace Under Pressure too. Certainly there is on that home video. And, you might get the medley at the end, and they would do like Closer to the Heart. But, even when you listen to that excellent live concert that came with the 40th anniversary of Moving Pictures, they're still opening with 2112 Overture and Temples of Syrinx. And it's almost like, wow, I didn't realize they kept that going for such a long time. But starting with Signals, that all went out the window, and the set list became very much new material. And I know there's a lot of old school fans that didn't like that, but I love the fact that they always pushed the new material. They always played at least half of the new album, where, nowadays if a band puts out a new album, you might hear one song on it, maybe two, and you won't be hearing them come next tour. So, when I saw them live, they did Between the Wheels, and I think Red Sector A was in the set as well. That's the Grace Under Pressure. But the R30 set list was so great because it was so well representative, and they even had time to throw in those covers from Feedback. So no complaints there. I'm glad I got to see them at least once.
Fantastic. Well, you got to see him at least once, and this guy's never seen them. So
I do remember that
they were not a globetrotting band. They just weren't.
Yeah. Thoughts and prayers, guys. Thoughts and prayers.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Peter. When I was in college, me and my roommates had the VHS of Grace Under Pressure live. And I remember just wearing it out.
Yeah. And
unfortunately, I didn't get that triple play DVD, and I wish I did, because it's not easy to come by now. But I do think it's interesting, though.
Some things, and that's another topic for another time, but there's some things that you don't think are going to be hard to find because it's a big band. But if you don't get them when they first come out, you're out of luck.
Yeah. I do think it's interesting. We were talking about how the set list changed when they hit Signals, and a lot of people who don't seem to be very happy about the direction that Rush took in the 80s will kind of create their own narrative in that, that Rush, that Alex was sort of forced into this whole technology era and everything. And that wasn't the case at all. He was into it. And I have always thought that was his best playing, when he tried to figure out where he was going to fit. That's when he really started getting interesting. He was always great, but
really interesting work during all of these years. Yeah, he had difficulties because, anybody that knows anything about recording sound will tell you that keyboards and guitars occupy the same sort of spectrum. And let's not forget, you've got two channels. You're trying to ram a lot of things into two channels. What's going to be heard and what isn't. And not everybody listens really close with headphones on. So it's easy to hear just something casually and go, I barely even hear any guitar in there. But when you listen, you're like, yeah, there's tons of guitar in there, especially on this album. It's thick and dense with guitar.
And bottom end, that really kind of surprised me when I was it was like whooshka. You hear this really big.
Another funny story about Alex too. Sorry, Pete. But this is the album where Alex was playing the Hentor Sportscaster, as opposed to a Fender Stratocaster. And the way that whole joke started was that when Peter Henderson left his number for the guys to call him back, the way he signed his name, it looked like it said Hentor. So they started calling him Hentor the Barbarian because, so Hentor Sportscaster, somehow it led to that being written on Alex's Strat, and people would write him. It's like, how much is a Hentor Sportscaster? Where can I get a Hentor Sportscaster? So that's something that I think about when I think about this period too. That was different for him because he never played Strats much before either.
Yeah. Absolutely. One thing I've noticed on the comments on my Rush shows on this channel is a lot of people, because we've covered a lot of the 80s albums, say this is the album that they lost it for me.
Yeah.
And it's a bit of a head scratch. Oh, I love it up to Signals, but this is the album where I got off the wagon.
Yeah. But I bet you there's just as many people that this is where they got on.
Well, that was my entry point. It has
to do with age. It has to do with a lot of factors.
I feel like I talk a lot about the 80s era of Rush. I talk about how it's my favorite, but I almost feel like I have to put a disclaimer in there. Do I think that the early Rush up to 2112 is great? Absolutely. Do I think that middle period, the Prague period with Hemispheres and Farewell to Kings and the Permanent Waves and Moving Pictures, do I think that's great? Of course I do. But I like the 80s period the best, but it's like it's here and all the other periods are like here, so it's like it's not like it's
not a big gap between
absolutely. I like the way they were before.
And if you can remember when these albums came out and buying them as opposed to going back and listening to them, you could love something that was way, way older. But it's not quite the same as the stuff that you remember waiting to go get, For me, the way that it turned out with me, the first Rush album that I bought as soon as it came out was A Show of Hands, but that doesn't mean, I love A Farewell to Kings. I love 2112. I don't think they have a bad album, but yeah, the 80s period, those are the videos that I saw all the time. I do have a soft spot for it. I have a soft spot for the 80s. In general.
Yeah. That Show of Hands, I read a Rolling Stone review. They gave it 1.5 stars. I was so angry. I couldn't believe it. And I too bought that album when it first came out.
And a while back, probably about, I don't know, it was probably about 7 or 8 years ago, I decided to do my own personal little Rush live album shootout. And I played them all back to back, and I tried to figure out which one was the best one. Which one did I like the best? And A Show of Hands won. And it surprised me. I didn't think it would, but I think it sounds the best. I love the songs on it. And I thought for sure it was going to be Exit Stage Left, or something like that. But it was just, it's a great live album.
Yeah. But gents, this is a band that has evolved. Yep. They are not AC/DC. They're not the Ramones. They have not put out
as much
the
as
same
we love
album
AC/DC,
again,
yes.
And as much as I love the Ramones, it's not the same album again and again and again. They have evolved, and I love that. That's what I love about Rush. So if you like that early stuff, it's going to be much different to the 80s and the 90s because they have evolved. It's an evolution of their sound, lyrical content.
Like even if you hear a song from the Grace Under Pressure live album, like Spirit of Radio or Closer to the Heart, and someone just plays it, you're going to go, well, that sounds like the Grace Under Pressure era, even though it's an older song. So even on those tours where they were playing the older songs, you can like listen. If you haven't got them completely memorized, you can go, well, that sounds late 80s to me, even though it's an older song. So they always evolve. Their guitar sounds always evolve. The choice of the instruments they used always evolved. So
absolutely.
yeah, there's really, they're just kind of all on their own. There's no one else quite like them that, inspires that sort of geekiness that we're showing here. Proud to do so.
And there's no bands like them now. So, and there's so many great songs in their catalog. They're ripe for reinterpretation. I'd love a young up-and-coming band to put their spin on some of these songs, because a lot of people think their songs are inaccessible, but they're totally accessible.
Yeah.
This album is commercial. It's hard-hitting. It's got some hard-hitting lyrical content, but yet it's still commercial. Yep. And it's just ripe for the picking for a young up-and-coming band. Put your own spin on it and, put their music out to the masses. I don't want this band to wither on the vine. And that's the thing about rock, guys, because in 50 years' time, I don't know what music's going to be like. Are Rush going to be remembered? I don't know. I don't know.
So. Well, I think so, but yeah, we don't know for sure.
I'm talking about world.
I think there'll be pockets all over the world, but my kids are 21 and 19. They both like Rush, and I didn't actively try to get them into the band. They just all of a sudden did, and I'm like, borrow as many CDs. Feel free, borrow as many CDs as you want.
Take them, I'll buy more. Great.
Yeah.
A quick shout out.
A good excuse to buy all the remasters.
Right.
Yeah. A quick shout out for the Dave Grohl concert. It was really heartwarming to see Geddy and Alex back on stage. Any final thoughts on that?
I think it was a really good thing for them to do. I mean, people argue about, what should Rush do? What should they do? Anything at all? I think that's a perfect example of the kind of thing that I thought it was absolutely appropriate for them to do. And it looks like they had a good time.
Yeah. Well, thanks, guys. I think this is a really good deep dive episode. It's one of my favorite albums. It was my first. So sorry about the indulgence, but I'm happy to indulge with you guys. Anything about Rush. And one final thought that I want to share with you that I got off YouTube. Somebody put a comment that really sums it up. There are two types of people. Either you like Rush or you're wrong. So that's my final comments. So please like and subscribe. Please like and subscribe to Rock Daydream Nation, and we'll do another one probably in a month's time. Check it out. Cheers.